I absolutely love the versatility of using zoom lenses, and when I think of a well-rounded zoom lens kit, I think of a 16-35, a 24-70, and a 70-200. But sometimes getting those really high-quality zoom lenses that we all obviously want can be really expensive. Luckily, now Tamron has all three of those zoom lens spots filled. Actually, you're incorrect. What do you mean? Tamron doesn't have a 16-35, they have a 17-28. I mean, yeah, okay, you're right. And they don't have a 24-70, they have a 28-75. Yeah, okay, you're right. And they also don't have a 70-200, they have a 70-180. Okay, I get it, but that's what we're gonna do in this video, is look at some of the differences between a 70-200 and the 70-180. Just get out of here, let me make my video. Sorry about the interruption. In this video today, we're gonna be taking a look at the Tamron 70-180 f2.8 and compare it to its closest competitor, the Sony 70-200 f4G lens. So first and foremost, the reason that we're going to be talking about the Tamron versus the cheaper Sony rather than the Sony G Master is just because they're in a lot closer of a price range. The Tamron comes in at $11.99, making it the cheapest option, but we've also got the Sony that comes in at $14.99 regularly, but is often on sale for $12.99, and there's a lot of used options out there that you can get for cheaper. Because it's a little bit of an older lens, you can find those things. And then of course there's the G Master, and it comes in at $25.99 US, which is why I'm kind of leaving it out of this comparison, because it's just so much more expensive that really, if you're looking at the Tamron, you're probably not even looking at the G Master necessarily. All right, so we've established that the Sony is a couple $100 more expensive than the Tamron. Let's see if we can figure out why. Starting off with the build of these two lenses. The Sony feels like it's built like a tank. I feel like I could use this thing as a hammer and it would probably be just fine in the end. The focus and zoom ring are both smooth and have a nice resistance to them, as well as the nice rubber grip on the outside. Overall, you definitely feel like you're holding a premium piece of glass when you have this one. The Tamron, on the other hand, does feel a little bit more like a budget lens. There's definitely a lot of plastic in the construction, and unfortunately I know firsthand how easily this will break if you accidentally drop it. I chipped away part of the front filter thread in an accidental drop. Luckily the rest of the lens still works flawlessly, so I could continue with my testing. And no, dropping the lens was not on purpose, and it was not part of my testing. The focus ring on the Tamron does feel pretty smooth, but it's a little bit thin. It feels like there's not much to grab onto, as well as the texture of the outside is not easy to grip. It's got more of a plasticky feeling than a rubber feeling. And the zoom ring definitely doesn't feel as smooth as the Sony. It's got a little bit of friction going on there, kind of plastic on plastic rubbing feeling, as well as you can tell, we've got the extending barrel, which we'll talk about a little bit later. The weight of these two lenses is actually pretty close, with 840 grams for the Sony and 810 grams for the Tamron. Now that weight is without the tripod mount, but it really doesn't weigh much. The Tamron actually has a 1mm wider diameter, but it uses a 67mm filter thread, whereas the Sony uses a 72. I think this is because Tamron has used 67 on the rest of the lenses in this lineup, so they wanted to keep it consistent. As far as the length of these lenses, the Sony is quite a bit longer. The Tamron is 149mm long, whereas the Sony is 175, but the Tamron has an extending barrel and the Sony doesn't. And when the barrel is extended on the Tamron, it's actually a couple millimeters longer than the Sony. That being said, the fact that the Tamron is a little bit shorter makes it easier to bring with you in a bag. The Sony is rated as dust and moisture resistant, whereas the Tamron just calls it moisture resistant. I don't know how different that's actually going to be on the two of them, but I know that having an extending barrel makes there more chance that you're going to get moisture or dust inside that lens. Now, as far as extra features go, the Tamron's list is pretty short. There is a lock to keep the lens from extending unintentionally, which I must admit is kind of a cool feature in theory. In reality, it is pretty much completely unnecessary because that lens does not move on its own. I have a couple of lenses that definitely extend if they're like hanging from my backpack or if I'm just holding it in my hand or something like that, but this one, it doesn't move. So that lock is really unnecessary, and I just kind of find it is annoying, to be completely honest. The The Sony, on the other hand, has a plethora of cool features, a lot of which you'll find on the G Master version as well. Like I said before, we've got internal zoom, which is a really cool feature to have. It just feels really nice when you're using the lens for it not to necessarily extend while you're zooming. We've got an autofocus manual focus toggle switch. We've got a toggle switch between the full focus range or just 3 meters to infinity. And then there's a big one that makes this stand out. It's got steady shot built in, so we've got stabilization in the lens. And especially when you're at longer focal lengths like this can make a big difference. There's a switch on the side of the lens where you've actually got 2 different types. There's a general stabilization, and then there's one specifically for panning. Again, this is something that the Tamron doesn't have. Luckily, most of the Sony full frame bodies have internal stabilization built into them, but doubling up with lens stabilization can be huge, especially when you're at these longer focal lengths. If you're shooting video, you'll get steadier shots, as well as if you're shooting photos in low light, you can get a little bit more out of your shutter speed. We've also got a focus hold button that you can customize to whatever you want. Actually, there are 3 of them, but they all function as one button. But depending on how you have the lens oriented, that way they're easier to get at. And speaking of that, we've got a tripod collar mount that's actually movable, so you can change it between portrait or landscape mode or however you want it. And it's removable as well, so if you don't want it on there, you can just take it off. This is another thing that the Tamron doesn't even have the option for, as far as I'm aware. Now, since that section leans so heavily in favor of the Sony lens, let's talk about something where the Tamron absolutely crushes, and that is close focusing distance. The Sony's minimum focusing distance is about 1 meter, whereas the Tamron's is under 1 foot. So if you want that close minimum focusing distance, the Tamron is definitely the winner in that department. Okay, so that takes care of a lot of the specs and features and those kinds of things, but what about a couple of the most obvious questions? First and foremost being the difference between 180 millimeters and 200 millimeters. Is there a bug on my lens a second ago? So for me, and in my testing, the difference between 180 millimeters and 200 millimeters was not super significant. It's definitely there, you'll definitely notice a little bit, but in practice, in the actual use of these 2 lenses, it didn't really make that big of a difference for me. So it's not necessarily a point that I would give to Sony for having the extra reach or anything. It's handy, but it's not that handy. Then on the other end of the conversation, of course, we've got f2.8 on the Tamron versus the f4 on the Sony. Now, once again, this is something that you might notice, but especially at these long focal lengths, it really isn't a huge thing. You get a little bit more light and you get a little bit more blurry background from the Tamron, but not a huge amount. So I don't necessarily give a point to the Tamron in that category either. And you might be thinking, okay, well, what about low light? f2.8 has to help there. Sometimes, in certain cases, it seemed like the f4 was pretty darn close to the same light transmission as the f2.8, which I thought was a little bit weird, but maybe it just has better transmission. And again, with the Sony stabilization in the lens, you can actually get a little bit more out of your shutter speed, so that can make up for the light in photography anyway. Okay, so what about autofocus, sharpness, and image quality? For autofocus, I didn't really have any issues with either of these. They both performed really well. Tamron has been doing a great job. Obviously, Sony does a great job with their native lenses. No complaints there whatsoever. The Sony 70-200 was already a really sharp lens. I think the Tamron might have a slight advantage on it. It seemed like in certain pictures, I would be like, okay, the Tamron is sharper on this one and the Sony's sharper on that one. We're really splitting hairs there. I would say that they're probably about even. And then as far as image quality, I think they're both fantastic. Really, it was minimal differences between the two. All right, so I've jammed your brain full of information about these 2 lenses, but brass tacks, which one would I recommend if you're in the market for a 70-200 for your Sony system? If you were absolutely going to make me pick one, I'd probably go with the Sony one for a couple of reasons. The stabilization in the lens is a big one for me, as well as the internal zoom. I really like that it has a tripod mount on it, and I'm a really big fan of the build quality of this lens. It's a pleasure to zoom and focus. It's just really nice to use. You feel like you're using a really premium piece of glass. That being said, if you're looking for something that you don't need all those bells and whistles, maybe you don't feel like you need stabilization, as well as if you really want to have that f2.8, then the Tamron is going to be the way to go. But as always, I want to hear from you. Let me know down in the comments which of these 2 lenses you would choose. I'm going to keep going even though this plane is gone. So let me know down in the comments which one you would choose. And on your way down there, hit the like and subscribe button, hit that bell notification so you don't miss out on future reviews and tutorials. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Stupid plane. Can't you see I'm doing important things about cameras for YouTube? These people have their priorities all mixed up. Hello, airplane. Welcome to the show. Bugs. Freaking hate bugs. Just gonna have another boat here. It's a boat time. Just wait for these waves to do their thing. I guess I should stop recording before I just go and do other things, hey?